The Curse of Tutankhamun's Tomb. On November 26, 1922, Howard Carter broke through the sealed doorway of a tomb that had remained untouched for over 3,000 years. Inside lay the mummified body of the boy King Tutankhamun, surrounded by treasures beyond imagination. But within months, something far darker began to unfold. Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's financier, died suddenly from an infected mosquito bite just weeks after entering the burial chamber. His death was swift and mysterious, occurring at exactly 1:55 in the morning. At that precise moment, all the lights in Cairo went dark without explanation, and back in England, Carnarvon's dog howled and collapsed dead. The official explanation was blood poisoning, a simple infection. But what followed could not be dismissed so easily. Within 7 years, 12 people connected to the tomb's opening were dead. Arthur Mace, who helped break the seal, died of arsenic poisoning. George J. Gould, who visited the tomb, succumbed to fever within months. Radiologist Archibald Reed, who x-rayed the mummy, died of exhaustion and illness shortly after. Even Carter's personal secretary, Richard Bethel, was found dead under suspicious circumstances. Modern scientists later discovered dangerous mold spores and bacteria sealed inside ancient Egyptian tombs, organisms that had festered in darkness for millennia. Aspergillus niger and other deadly pathogens were found in concentrations high enough to trigger fatal infections in anyone who disturbed them. The curse was not supernatural. It was biological warfare, 3,000 years in the making. The ancient priests had created a perfect trap, sealing death itself inside stone walls, waiting patiently for grave robbers who would breathe in their doom. And when that seal was broken, the curse awakened. History calls it superstition. The dead call it something else. The Curse of Timur's Tomb. In 1941, Soviet archaeologists stood before the Jade Tomb of Timur, the legendary conqueror who had built an empire on the bones of 17 million people. Inscribed on the slab were words in Persian: "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." Local elders begged them not to open it. They opened it anyway. On June 22, 1941, the tomb was unsealed. That same day, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. 3 million German soldiers crossed into Soviet territory, beginning a campaign that would kill over 27 million Soviet citizens. Coincidence, historians claimed. A tragic alignment of dates. But the evidence runs deeper. Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, had razed entire cities, constructed pyramids from the skulls of his enemies, and weaponized terror as statecraft. His empire stretched from Moscow to Delhi, and his military genius was studied by conquerors for centuries. When Soviet scientist Mikhail Gerasimov reconstructed Timur's face from his skull, he found evidence of severe injuries and a limp matching historical accounts exactly. Every detail confirmed the legends. In 1942, as the siege of Leningrad starved 1 million people and Stalingrad became a graveyard, Stalin himself intervened. He ordered Timur's remains returned to Samarkand with full Islamic rites. The reburial took place in November 1942. Within weeks, the tide of war shifted. The German Sixth Army was encircled at Stalingrad and destroyed. The unstoppable Wehrmacht began its long retreat. Soviet generals would later admit they could not explain the sudden reversal. Timur had warned them. His curse was not magic. It was historical momentum, the weight of empires disturbed. Some doors were sealed for a reason. The Curse of the Pharaohs. The deaths surrounding Tutankhamun's tomb were not isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern that stretched across decades and continents, claiming anyone who dared disturb the resting places of Egypt's god-kings. In 1891, Thomas Douglas Murray purchased a mummy case in Luxor. Within days, his arm was accidentally shot off during a hunting trip. The photographer who documented the case died suddenly. The man who translated the hieroglyphs on the coffin committed suicide. When the British Museum finally acquired it, staff members began dying or suffering catastrophic accidents at impossible rates. The pattern was undeniable, yet publicly dismissed as coincidence. Egyptologist James Henry Breasted died of fever after excavating royal tombs. Arthur Wigall, who mocked the curse openly, lost his daughter to illness and died himself within months. Even the X-ray technician who examined King Casimir's mummy in Poland died within a year from a mysterious respiratory illness. Modern toxicology has revealed the mechanism. Ancient Egyptian embalming materials contained mercury, arsenic, and other heavy metals in concentrations far exceeding safe limits. Sealed tombs accumulated radioactive radon gas from the surrounding limestone. Fungal spores evolved in isolation for millennia, developing strains human immune systems had never encountered. The priests knew this. Tomb paintings show embalmers wearing primitive masks and gloves. Warnings were carved into stone, not as superstition, but as quarantine protocol. They understood contagion better than Victorian archaeologists with their shovels and hubris. The curse was never supernatural. It was ancient Egypt's final defense, a biological barrier protecting sacred ground, and it worked. For thousands of years it worked perfectly, until greed proved stronger than wisdom, and the dead began teaching the living what happens when you ignore their warnings. The Curse of the Iceman Ötzi. In 1991, German hikers discovered a frozen corpse emerging from a melting glacier in the Ötztal Alps. The body was over 5,000 years old, perfectly preserved by ice, with clothing, tools, and even his last meal intact. Scientists named him Ötzi, and he became the oldest natural mummy ever found in Europe. But within years, people connected to his discovery began dying under circumstances too strange to dismiss. Rainer Henn, the forensic pathologist who handled the body with bare hands, died in a car accident while traveling to a conference about Ötzi. Kurt Fritz, the mountain guide who led researchers to the site, died in an avalanche, the only victim despite being an experienced climber. Helmut Simon, the hiker who actually discovered the mummy, vanished during a blizzard and was found frozen 8 days later in the exact position Ötzi had been found. Dieter Warneck, the head of the rescue team that recovered Simon's body, died of a heart attack shortly after. Konrad Spindler, the lead archaeologist who examined Ötzi, died of complications from multiple sclerosis that appeared suddenly after the discovery. Tom Loewy, the scientist who analyzed Ötzi's DNA and tools, died of a blood disorder at age 63, 7 deaths. All connected, all sudden. Modern science explains Ötzi's preservation as natural mummification through freeze-drying, but analysis of his body revealed something darker. He had been murdered, an arrow through his shoulder blade, a blow to the head. His killer had pursued him into the mountains and executed him. Ötzi died violently, possibly as a ritual sacrifice or political assassination. If curses are born from violent death and unfinished business, then Ötzi's rage had 5,000 years to crystallize in ice, and when that ice melted, so did whatever had kept his anger frozen. The Curse of the Delhi Purple Sapphire. In 1857, British Colonel W. Ferris looted a sacred temple in Kanpur during the Indian Rebellion. Among the treasures he stole was a large amethyst, deep purple and flawless, set in silver surrounded by astrological symbols. He brought it back to England as a trophy. His family began to disintegrate immediately. Ferris himself was plagued by financial ruin and health problems until his death. His son inherited the stone and was driven to suicide within months. The gem passed to a family friend who suffered bankruptcy and illness before desperately giving it away. Every owner reported the same phenomena: crushing bad luck, psychological torment, vivid nightmares, and a sensation of being watched. In 1904, Edward Heron Allen, a scientist and writer, acquired the stone. A rationalist by nature, he dismissed the curse as superstition. Within weeks, he was convinced otherwise. Friends who borrowed it returned it within days, reporting accidents and misfortune. Heron Allen had the stone sealed in 7 boxes, surrounded by protective charms, and deposited it in his bank with instructions that it never be opened. In 1943, he donated it to the Natural History Museum in London with a written warning describing its malevolent history. The museum kept it locked away for decades. When it was finally displayed in 2004, staff reported equipment malfunctions and strange occurrences in the gallery. The curse, scientists now theorize, may be partly psychological, a self-fulfilling prophecy powered by belief and guilt. But the temple it was stolen from had been sacred to Kali, the goddess of destruction and time. The priest had consecrated that stone in rituals meant to bind protective forces to it. What Ferris stole was not just a gem, it was a religious object, weaponized by faith and activated by theft. And it still waits in London, locked behind glass, patient and eternal. The Curse of Tecumseh. In 1811, Shawnee leader Tecumseh confronted William Henry Harrison, the governor who had seized Native American lands through manipulation and force. Tecumseh warned him that if Harrison continued his path of destruction, he and every future president elected in a year ending in 0 would die in office. Harrison dismissed it as the desperate threat of a defeated people. He was wrong. In 1840, William Henry Harrison was elected president. He died 31 days into his term from pneumonia. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected, assassinated. In 1880, James Garfield was elected, assassinated within months. In 1900, William McKinley was elected to his second term, assassinated the following year. In 1920, Warren Harding was elected, dead from a sudden illness in office. In 1940, Franklin Roosevelt was elected to his third term, dead in office during his fourth. In 1960, John Kennedy was elected, assassinated. 7 presidents, 7 deaths. An unbroken pattern across 150 years. Statisticians calculated the probability of this occurring by chance alone, less than 1 in 2 billion. Ronald Reagan, elected in 1980, survived an assassination attempt by inches. The bullet missed his heart by less than an inch. He was the first to break the pattern. George W. Bush, elected in 2000, survived a grenade attack in Georgia that failed to detonate. The curse, historians argue, is simply coincidence, magnified by pattern recognition and confirmation bias. But Tecumseh was a prophet among his people, trained in spiritual practices outsiders never understood. He had predicted earthquakes, eclipses, and military outcomes with impossible accuracy. His curse was not magic. It was historical karma, a debt paid in blood across generations. And whether through supernatural force or the weight of collective guilt, it claimed every life he promised it would. The Curse of the Hope Diamond. The Hope Diamond, one of the largest blue diamonds ever discovered, has a documented history of destroying everyone who possessed it. Stolen from the eye of a Hindu idol in India sometime in the 1600s, the stone was said to carry the wrath of the goddess Sita. The French merchant who stole it was torn apart by wild dogs. King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette owned it. Both were beheaded during the French Revolution. Henry Hope, the banker who gave the diamond its name, died bankrupt. Evelyn Walsh McLean, the American socialite who wore it constantly, watched her son die in a car accident, her daughter overdose on sleeping pills, and her husband leave her for another woman before descending into madness herself. Every owner faced ruin, madness, or violent death. The coincidences piled too high to ignore. When the Smithsonian acquired the diamond in 1958, the mailman who delivered it, James Todd, was immediately struck by a truck, suffered a crushed leg, a head injury in another accident, and watched his house burn down, all within a year. Gemologists have studied the Hope Diamond extensively. It contains trace amounts of boron, which give it the rare blue color and also make it phosphorescent, glowing blood red under ultraviolet light. Some theorize the curse is purely psychological, a narrative attached to an object that confirmation bias keeps alive. But in Hindu tradition, temple idols were consecrated through rituals designed to make them living vessels of divine presence. To steal from them was not theft, it was assault against a god. The Hope Diamond was never just a stone, it was a fragment of the divine, ripped from its sacred purpose and dragged through centuries of greed and violence. And if objects can absorb the energy of their history, then the Hope Diamond has soaked in 500 years of blood, betrayal, and rage. It sits now in a museum, beautiful and cold, waiting for the next hand foolish enough to claim it. The Curse of King Casimir IV's Tomb. In 1973, a team of archaeologists opened the tomb of King Casimir IV's Jagiellon in Wawel Cathedral, Krakow. Casimir had ruled Poland in the 1500s, a time of plague and political intrigue. The tomb had remained sealed for nearly 5 centuries. Within days of opening it, team members began experiencing strange respiratory symptoms. Within weeks, 4 of the 12 researchers were dead from mysterious lung infections that doctors could not identify or treat. The speed and severity shocked the medical community. Dr. Bill Swalsemik, the expedition leader, died of acute respiratory failure. 3 other members followed in rapid succession, their lungs destroyed by an aggressive, unknown pathogen. Mainstream medicine struggled to explain it. Initial theories suggested modern fungal contamination or psychosomatic illness, but when microbiologists analyzed samples from the tomb, they discovered something extraordinary. The sealed chamber contained extraordinarily high concentrations of Aspergillus flavus and other deadly mold species that had been growing in isolation for centuries. These organisms had evolved in the darkness, undisturbed, developing toxicity far beyond normal strains. The researchers had breathed in millions of spores the moment the seal broke, but there was another layer. Historical records showed that plague swept through Krakow multiple times during Casimir's reign. His tomb may have contained not just natural mold, but actual plague bacteria, preserved in the cool, dry conditions. The medieval embalmers knew what they were dealing with. They sealed the tomb with materials designed to contain contamination, not just preserve a body. The curse was not supernatural. It was medieval quarantine protocol, a biological seal that lasted 500 years until modern arrogance broke it open. The dead had tried to warn the living. The warnings were written in stone, in seals, in the very architecture of death. But science believed itself immune to history, and history taught them otherwise. The Curse of the Basano Vase. In 1500s Italy, a beautiful silver vase was crafted as a wedding gift for a bride in the village of Basano del Grappa. On the night before her wedding, she was found dead, clutching the vase. Her dying words were a curse. Anyone who owned it would die. The vase vanished from records for centuries, passing through unknown hands until it resurfaced in 1988. An Italian woman discovered it buried in her garden and brought it inside. She died within months. Her family sold it at auction. The new owner died within weeks. The next owner survived only 3 months. The pattern was consistent and undeniable. Each owner experienced sudden, violent illness or accident. By the time the vase had killed its 4th modern victim, Italian authorities intervened. The police confiscated it as evidence, unsure what crime to charge it with, unable to destroy it and afraid to keep it. They locked it in a lead-lined case and buried it in an undisclosed location. It remains there, officially erased from public record. Skeptics argue the curse is mass hysteria, that the deaths were coincidental, and the story grew with each retelling. But toxicology offers another explanation. Renaissance artisans often used mercury, lead, and arsenic in their metalwork and decorative processes. A vase crafted in the 1500s could contain lethal concentrations of these substances. Over time, handling it, drinking from it, or even keeping it in a warm room could release toxic vapors. The bride may have been the first victim of simple poisoning, not supernatural vengeance. Her curse was not prophecy, it was warning. She knew the vase had killed her and tried to prevent it from killing others. For 500 years, her warning went unheeded. The curse worked not because of magic, but because human greed is more powerful than fear. And now the vase waits underground, silent and patient, for the next hand that believes itself immune to history. The Curse of the Women of Glencoe. On February 13, 1692, the Campbell clan massacred 38 members of the MacDonald clan in Glencoe, Scotland, violating the sacred laws of hospitality. The soldiers had been guests in MacDonald homes for 12 days before receiving orders to kill everyone under 70. They murdered men, women, and children in their sleep, burned homes with families trapped inside, and pursued survivors into the frozen mountains where many froze to death. As the killing ended, the MacDonald women who survived gathered at the burial sites and pronounced a formal curse upon Clan Campbell. They invoked ancient Celtic powers, binding their grief and rage into words meant to echo through generations. The curse declared that no Campbell would ever find peace in Glencoe, that the land itself would reject them, and that their name would carry shame until the last MacDonald received justice. For over 3 centuries, the curse has manifested in documented ways. Campbells who attempt to live in or near Glencoe report persistent misfortune, illness, and psychological distress. Business ventures fail. Relationships collapse. Even today, some establishments in the region still display signs reading "No Campbells." In 2012, nearly 320 years after the massacre, a Campbell chief finally issued a formal apology to the MacDonalds. He acknowledged the historical crime and asked for forgiveness. The MacDonald clan accepted, but the curse, if it exists, was never theirs to lift. It belongs to the land itself, to the rocks that absorbed the blood, to the mountains that witnessed the betrayal. Celtic tradition holds that earth remembers violence, that land becomes sacred or cursed through the events that occur upon it. Glencoe is both. The curse was not supernatural, it was cultural memory, weaponized through ritual and sustained by collective trauma across centuries. It worked because both clans believed it would, and belief, repeated across generations, becomes indistinguishable from truth. The women of Glencoe understood this. They turned their grief into a weapon that would outlive them all, and it did.